Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We are moving to the next session on learnings and recommendations of the Charter Project. Hyvää huomenta kaikki. Siirrymme seuraavaan osioon, jossa keskustelemme Charter-projektin tuloksista ja suosituksista. My name is Pirjo Hamari. Yes. My name is Pirjo Hamari. I come from the Finnish Heritage Agency, where I work as a director of development. I am in Charter Project, I work as a co-leader of Work Package 5 on alliances, future strategies and recommendations, together with Astrid Hannes from ERRI. Let me start this session on the learnings and recommendations of the Charter Project by a personal story of my professional life. I was trained as an archaeologist at the University of Helsinki and spent my first 10 professional years in archaeological fieldwork and later managing fieldwork projects from the office side. I moved on from that to digital heritage management out of curiosity and interest for the digital dimension of archaeological heritage. After spending 6 years in developing sites and monuments registers and working with GIS solutions, I was again drawn to a new path when I started working for the unit for museum development, first as an expert and later as a director, and I have now spent 15 years in this position working for the whole museum sector in Finland. My current work is heavily policy, strategy, structures and funding oriented. And all of this happened within one organization, our National Heritage Agency. I only need to do something in the cultural environment department, and I have worked in all of the sectors of heritage that our organization covers. Alongside, I stuck to my old love for research and finished my PhD in archaeology in 2020. Did I imagine all of these career changes and options when I entered the university over 35 years ago to study archaeology? Of course not. Archaeology is one of those educational paths where your career options appear limited. And for my other occupations, more on the management side, no specific curricula even exist. However, I have enjoyed all of my perhaps slightly unorthodox career choices and the work they have allowed me to do. And I recognize that somewhere along the way, I've accumulated all kinds of secondary skills that are now very useful in my work. Project management, financial skills, leadership skills, working with stakeholders, digital competencies, managing challenging discussions, co-development, participation. You get the idea of these kinds of skills that I'm talking about. Looking at all this and my personal career paths through the lens of the Charter Project, a couple of the project's learnings resonate with me very closely. That the well-functioning of a heritage sector would greatly benefit from better opportunities for mobility and horizontal career moves across the sector. And that transversal skills development plays here a very important role. And here we come to the project and its results. Charter identifies skill shortages and mismatches in the cultural heritage sector to bridge the gap between education and occupational systems to ensure the sector's viability and illustrates its contribution to social, economic and environmental sustainability in Europe. This session on learnings and recommendations of the project brings you a summary of the project's key recommendations. They are the results of research, inquiries, consultation and cooperation with regional, national and European stakeholders carried out by the project since 2021. And why is it important to aim for these systemic changes proposed? The recommendations seek to provide a roadmap for actions that bolster and sustain the heritage sector and the wider community, emphasizing upskilling, future-proofing, and ensuring the recognition and transferability of heritage skills. Collectively, the recommendations support achieving the Charter vision, an innovative, enterprising sector that transforms the heritage resource into a drive for sustainability, into a driver of sustainable social, economic, and environmental change, and is an attractive and rewarding career option. Recommendations aim at ensuring the future of heritage through skills development. And by ensuring the future of heritage, we ultimately contribute to the future of our society in general. To present you the summary of the project recommendations, we have 3 key partners from the project. Bosse Lagerqvist from ICOMOS, Elis Marçal from E.C.C.O, and Karin Riegler from Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. They will be joined by Margherita from Sani from NEMO, who will illustrate through practical examples gathered by the project possible solutions for real-life applications of the policy recommendations. Bosse, Elis, Karin, and Margherita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pirjo. Good morning, but first, god morgon alla ni i Sverige. Kul att ni har kommit in på Zoom och ser på det här, så vi hälsar er hjärtligt välkomna. Det här är också ett exempel på hur kulturellt diversifierat det här projektet är, där vi har en mängd olika språk som vi behöver prata. Så hjärtligt välkomna. And now over to English. We have a lot of challenges in this project, amongst others languages, as you might understand, and how to understand different concepts and terminologies. I don't know if you heard Pirjo's first welcome was in Finnish. So this is also an example of how this project is situated in a European context. We are trying now, in a very short time, convey the results and learnings from this project, which in itself is a challenge. We, as Erasmus Blueprint project, of course, had a focus on skills and occupational profiles. But first, we need to contextualize that. We need to understand what are the sector, how is the sector look like, area or field of practices or whatever we want to call it. Is it a sector? So we try to start with understanding, if this works, yeah, it works. What is heritage today? And we understand heritage as something that is a broad societal asset, a resource for contributing to a sustainable and inclusive society. So this is the fundament, the umbrella and the framework for which we see heritage today in society. Not a side activity, but this activity needed to be integrated in all societal activities. So this understanding has, as Luis showed earlier, been extensively researched and mapped by the project partners that we could say are experts representing the variety of heritage activities and orientations, as well as geographically distributed over Europe through a number of regional case studies, and also, apart from that, meetings in other places in Europe where we also have had ideas about how the ecosystem for heritage is working in that part. This has resulted in a bunch of material, reports, but also databases that we perceive will continue to be developed after the project. specifically the one on education and training in Europe, and operating in that sector as part of the University of Gothenburg, I would say that would be a substantial improvement for students as well as staff in European universities to have an overview of possibilities for exchange in a European level. Early in the project, being a blueprint project, we need to focus on a so-called value chain, and instead of having a linear value chain where you put something in from the left and through a number of processes you put up something as a result to the right, we thought that culture and cultural heritage works in a little bit different manner. It's more of a circular value chain, almost like a hermeneutic spiral, indicating that the more heritage values are enhanced, the more heritage values are created. So this is how heritage, from the professional viewpoint, works, we think, in a societal context. And in the center of this, we find heritage as a common good. You could, of course, stress that, yeah, but heritage is also a reason for conflict, but we want to see and want to work with the aim that heritage is a common good in society. In this value chain, this circular value chain, we identified a number of tasks that could be grouped into different functional perspectives. So we have recognition, and we are doing a lot of different things in recognition. We are working with preservation and safeguarding. Also there we find a lot of different activities and tasks. We work with engagement and use. Also a number of activities and tasks are operated in these. So these are the core functional perspectives of the value chain of heritage in society. To support this, there are a number of supportive functional perspectives, also including a number of activities and tasks in research and development, in managerial routines for the field, and of course in governance and policy making. So all these different tasks and activities, of course, could also indicate different skills levels, different educational backgrounds, different whatever. So this is the big framework where we see where do we find skills shortages, skills gaps, needs for upskilling, etc. in this. So we need to have some kind of idea about this, and this is an illustration of the complexity of the heritage sector when you talk about skills and skills development. This is, of course, not an isolated activity in society. So around this, or situated in this, we have society at large, where we find how heritage is continuously generated and regenerated, reflecting the dynamic changing values in society that changes the meaning of heritage, and also thus changing how heritage practices are operated. So there is a lot of challenges and opportunities for heritage to work with heritage in the society. So some of the challenges and changes we see the heritage sector are facing, and as well as society at large. So we have one internal challenge within the heritage sector illustrated by the previous circular model, and that is the super diversity of heritage in Europe. The number of different activities and how they are different from different regions. Our 5 regional workshops cross over Europe indicates this clearly. There's very difficult to say that there's one way of operating heritage in Europe. It's different all over Europe. But we also have challenges that the society at large are facing. So we have geostrategic dynamics like the ongoing Russian invasion war in Ukraine that affects a lot of what happens in the rest of Europe. We have circular economy and green transition, and we think that heritage actually could be a resource to meet climate changes. We have the digital transition, both in terms of digitization of, for instance, museum collections, but also how we could use augmented reality, artificial intelligence in all the different functional perspectives of the circular value chain of heritage. So based on this rather substantial material, we have been distilling this into 12 recommendations. So we have heritage as an ecosystem, we have training and education, we have the recognition of professions and the mobility of professionals. So we will try in this little group here to convey to you the meaning of these recommendations. We will not recite the recommendations, but we will try to give you an impression of this. So we have these 12 recommendations, and Karin will tell you something about the recommendations pertaining to education and training. Elis will tell you something about recommendations to professional recognition, and I will try to tell you something about how the recommendations 1, 2, and 12 might link together. And in the material you have now, you have for each recommendation, you have actions for different target groups. In a later edition, you will also have examples for how these different actions are optionalized and examples of how to do this. And Margherita will end by giving you some examples. So there will be some repetition here of slides and information, but it's a way of just pushing it into your head. So be patient with us. So saying something about 1, 2, and 12, it builds on the fact that we could see that the skills forecasting that are done today are not sufficient in terms of providing data for the sector to actually being able to adjust to societal challenges. We think there are examples of how heritage knowledge and skills would have had the capabilities to actually be able to be drivers of circular economy in sustainable use of resources, strengthening social resilience, and mitigating climate change. But there is a very fragmented, limited recognition of the intersectional nature of heritage practice and the full breadth of its socio-economic relevance to other sectors. Instead, we see a clear visibility of heritage dimensions of climate adaptation, social inclusion, the digital shift, circular economy, etc., would have the ability to stimulate cross-potential pollination between sectors. So this is, we see today that it's spread over a wide area of different activities. And initially we saw that as a kind of problem, but perhaps we tend to see it more and more as an advantage. Heritage is situated all over the place. We just need to make it more visible. And these recommendations are steps to do that. So with this, I leave the word to Karin.
Thank you very much, Bosse. Bon dia, good morning und guten Morgen an alle, die aus dem deutschsprachigen Raum heute dabei sind. Don't worry, I won't go on speaking German. I have now the pleasure to continue with introducing you how the Charter recommendations focusing on education and training address the changing scenarios of the sector. What we have done is we have identified 4 priorities that are addressed by 6, or actually 7, 6.5, I will come back to this, recommendations. Our first priority in that regard is, of course, bridging the skills gaps and needs. What we mean by that, Louis Bonnet has already mentioned this in his introduction, is that education and training both higher education as well as vocational education and training have to equip graduates with the skills, with the knowledge necessary for the labor market. That's by far not the only task of education, but it is a very important one. The second one is about the loss of heritage skills. That's a phenomenon that is experienced worldwide, but we are focusing here only on Europe. Almost every, or probably every European country, every region knows about this. This is due to a number of complex societal and economic sectors. So education and training cannot tackle this problem alone, but we can contribute to counteracting or contribute our part to counteracting the loss of heritage skills. Thirdly, mobility is a fundamental right of European citizens. But mobility of workers and learners depends on certain preconditions. What is the right of mobility doing for me if my education that I perceive, for instance, here in Catalonia, is not recognized in any other or in another European country? So we have addressed the preconditions that make mobility a reality. And finally, the quality of education and training. Heritage is, as heritage practitioners know, it's a very fragile thing, and it may even be irreplaceable. That is most obvious in the context of tangible heritage. If you think of historical buildings or heritage objects, if something goes wrong, say for instance in terms of conservation and restoration, a heritage object can be lost or can be severely damaged. But it is also true for intangible heritage. If it is not recognized appropriately, we may lose that tradition. And this is why everybody involved has to be able to rely on the quality of education and training, and this is where quality assurance comes in. I am now continuing directly with the recommendations we are addressing, and I am starting with the bottom line. I've tried to color code it, and I will explain it to you. I can see the color. Oh yeah, they're better visible here than they are over there on this screen, so I'm relieved about that. I am starting with the bottom line, the yellow recommendations. Recommendations, again, I'm referring to the booklet here that previous speakers have also referred to. Recommendations 4, 3, and 7. They address the content of education and training. Recommendation number 4, we've wrote a whole deliverable about it, is about what are our learnings in terms of skills, gaps, and needs, and how to address them by education and training. And in this regard, Charter, this is what I want. Charter identified 8 pathways, 8 innovative, emerging education and training pathways for heritage. Don't worry, I won't go all into them, but what they are really about, it's 3 things main, or maybe 4 things. First of all, they are about people, about participatory governance, about participatory democracy in heritage. Secondly, they are about, and thirdly, they address the green and the blue transitions. And finally, the 4th point is they are about educating and training people to make these things happen. For instance, by training lawyers to draft heritage laws and regulations, to draft and implement heritage policies, to make those other priorities happen. I am now going back to my line. Recommendation number 3 is about complementing core heritage skills, which we found these are addressed more or less in all heritage education and training programs with the necessary transversal skills. What I mean by that, for instance, conservators, restorers very often work in self-employed, in small businesses, a small business, one person, small business owners. But what we found on the other hand, very few education and training programs in the field explicitly address entrepreneurial skills, managerial skills, all the skills you need in order to lead a small business. And recommendation number 7 is about a major skills gap that was mentioned by young heritage professionals, and that is work-based learning. And we even say that just about every heritage education and training program should at least think about making work-based learning mandatory, because that's such an important skills gap for young people entering the workplace. I am continuing now. I want to address recommendation number 2, the green bubble that you see here to the right. It's the half, the half recommendation that we are addressing, and it is about counteracting the loss of heritage skills. Education and training, as I've said in the beginning, has to play or can play an important part in making sure we are not losing even more skills than that we have already lost, even though that's not a problem education and training can tackle alone. I am now continuing with the front, the row above, with what we called systemic dimensions. They are a bit of the boring ones, but they are important. Recognition of prior learning. Recognition is sometimes even a challenge when you stay in your own country. It's sometimes even a challenge when we talk about formal education. That is education where you get a degree, a certificate that is based in law. But it is even much more a challenge when it comes to non-formal education. And this is what we found, a lot of continuing education and training. This kind of education that comes once you have entered the workplace, that very often is not based on law, but is offered by private education institutions. You do get some certificate, but it's very, very difficult to recognize, and it's even much more difficult to recognize across borders. And that difficulty is even increased when we talk about informal education and training. That's the kind of things that you learn from your parents. It's very important when it comes to a lot of traditional crafts, but it also refers to learning taking place in the workplace. Having that recognized is very, very important, but it's very, very difficult, which is why recommendation number 6 concentrates on the recognition of non-formal and informal learning and what we can do to make that a reality. I've also already spoken a lot about quality assurance. I don't need to repeat that here. But the only thing I want to say is, in addition to letting us rely on the quality of education and training, it's also a transparency instrument. And therefore, quality assurance has an influence on recognition and makes recognition easier because it makes learning transparent. And finally, The recommendation number 5, promoting a what we've called promoting a lifelong learning area for higher education, is a colorful one because it is on content issue as well as systemic issue. It's first of all about stressing the importance of lifelong learning, of continuing education for heritage professionals. Continuing education, shorter courses. This is where it's possible to concentrate on short-term needs, changing programs or offering that in the short term. That's an important thing that we really need to look at in the heritage sector. But it is also about technical things, about recognizing that kind of learning, as I've said before. This is why it's connected to the systemic dimensions. And this is why it's the colorful one. What you see in green, the green bubble, it's all sorts of technical instruments, transparency tools that help you, again, make all kinds of learning visible, transparent, and understandable for employers, for stakeholders outside your immediate educational sector, outside of where you did your education. And this is why we refer to these instruments in our recommendation, and this is why they are mentioned here. I am finished now with education and training, and I'm now passing on to my colleague Elis Marçal.
So, good morning, everybody. Bom dia a todos que estão em Portugal e obrigada por estarem connosco. So, as Bosse said, this has been a learning process. We have learned how do we do something that serves 27 countries and hundreds of regions and infinite differences and realities. So I'm going to, this is heritage. So inside the charter, work package 2 and some of the topics we addressed, we called ourselves the boring ones, you know, the things that nobody really wants to address, which is, when Bosse introduced the value chain, we had to go there because we realized that if we're going to study the skills gaps of a workforce in a specific sector, first, what is the sector about? Then the workforce is who are we skilling up? And who are these people? How do we find them? Do they pop up? Can you recognize them? All of those questions. So this leads us to a very interesting field of knowledge that it's taxonomy, statistics, and things like that. Nobody likes that. So we found areas of research that we needed to address. And we found, most of us knew, because in the charter we have professional bodies, we know by professional and personal experience that there are things that systemically a problem. So we knew that we had to address. So I'm presenting you the positive side. Okay, so what do we need to achieve that is a success, that actually professionals that we're gonna upskill, reskill, recognize, spend a huge amount of money in their training, in their capacity building, so that they actually serve as a fundamental sector for society, and Europe in particular. How these people will be recognized, how these people can move around Europe, how these people can be freelancers, be protected, having the social support or the conditions to work properly. So what we wanted to achieve was this: professional visibility and recognition so that they could move around freely. As Karin said, it's a right of being a European citizen. Then we wanted to empower this diverse workforce, which is highly misunderstood and highly overlooked, because we have changed dramatically in the last 20 years. We went from a driven institutional workforce to 80 to 90% in some areas, some countries, self-employed, outsourced workforce. And then we need to demonstrate that, yes, we're a sector, and yes, we do produce wealth, and yes, there's a lot of economic impact on what we do in our jobs, in our contribution to society. We're not a construction sector, but maybe if the indicators would be better, we would pop up as what we actually are, a driving force of local development, just as we see back home in our own region, in our own city. And the other thing we want in our recommendations is a lesson we learn is that there are several glass ceilings at local, regional, national, European level. So there's so much, and this is not only a taxonomies and indicators and statistics lesson, this is an all-over lesson. We learn a lot from bottom up, and we learn a lot from top down. So we think that one of the critical aspects is this multi-level and co-creative solutions and approaches. But to implement this in the field of the boring group, it's not easy. So I can't explain all the recommendations because they're highly technical, and even us, after 4 years, it's not easy. So I'm just going to do the ha-ha moment, you know? Okay, this is data that you get on website from Eurostat, okay? And back home, every single company, every single institution needs to register for their taxes. It's called the Economic Activities Code. All of you register, unless you're employed to somebody, but your institution is registered, okay? So it's called NACE, and those NACE codes organize and categorize all sectors all sectors of society practice, all industries, anything you can think of, it has to have a NACE code. Even volunteer organizations have a NACE code, okay? And there's a little family there called Division 91. Yeah, it's called Division 91 in a big group, in a bigger family called Recreations, Arts, and whatever, and sports. The earth is around, this is NACE, and this division is called Libraries, Archives, Museums, and Other Cultural Activities. You would say, okay, this is the obvious place for me to check, how is this? What are the enterprises? What is the number of these people practicing and working and operating, from the self-employed we talked to the big companies? What would be the number? Okay, this is the number for 2022, huh? And I think you can see there's this country that we know that it's not a big country, but it has 4. It's not 40, it's 4. And you go immediately, really? That's my neighborhood. And then you go to Italy, and Italy has 1,240, and then immediately you see there's something wrong here. Statistics are critical to make decisions for policy, to make decisions for education, to make decisions for funding, to make decisions for everything. Of course, you can't make decisions if you don't have evidence or data. So if we would use just this number, this is what pops up. Of course, as Bosse said, heritage is all over. Yeah, but I can't find it. So where is heritage? Where is heritage practice? Where is heritage enterprises? Just by looking at this, if you work on the sector, you say there's something wrong here. And it's very difficult to get this data. That's the issue. The Eurostat doesn't give it us because it's very difficult to get it. It's really a challenge. This is where we got to the model that we produce, the value chain, because it's an approach to develop statistics, indicators, and taxonomies. So our model has helped us to understand skills gaps, has helped us to understand needs for policy, needs for governance, needs for approaches, strategies in heritage, but it has also helped us to identify areas of practice, areas of occupations, and therefore can be used as a lens to help taxonomies and statistics. And we have the 6 functions. And the other thing that we propose on the left side, what you have is the existing matrix to calculate to define indicators, to calculate statistics. So as you can see, heritage is all over. And then you have the functions, which is what Bosse said, also a dimension used to define taxonomies. And we took that has been designed for the whole cultural sector, and we adapted for heritage. So the first thing we said is heritage is not just museums, historical places, archaeological. It also includes archives, libraries, books, press, visual arts, crafts. So we are proposing a single domain for everything that is considered heritage, and we're proposing 6 functions to identify every single activity, every single entrepreneurial-ish activity in heritage. And we believe that if you apply this lens into the taxonomies, into indicators, into statistics, you will be able, with a bit of work, we acknowledge it's a bit of work, it requires a bit of a mathematical effort, but it would in time increase the visibility of heritage practice professionals and most of all enterprises and entrepreneurship in Europe. Doing a huge jump, all of these topics are condensed in 3 recommendations. And remember that Bosse said in the beginning, the Charter mandate was about skills and improving employability and upskilling of professionals. So this was a sort of not a shortcut, a stroll that we did to provide a more integrated, comprehensive solution for the sector. So we, in fact, our project was not mandated to develop this, but we thought that there was an intrinsic connection between education upskilling and the recognition of those professionals. If you upskill them, and if they, as Pirjo said, if they change their career, there's got to be a way you can recognize them, you can identify them, and you can see the impact and the contribution they make into society. So everything is condensed in these 3. The first one is about recognition and mobility. And it uses, of course, European standards, European services, and European mechanisms to do so, because these fields of policy are very much standardized and they are very much binded by frameworks and regulations. So we have to stick to what is the mechanisms Europe has. The second one, which the 9, is about ways of making and of raising our awareness and our knowledge about the specific workforce and how can we support it and improve their working conditions, specifically heritage sector, not the whole cultural sector, specifically heritage sector. And I'll give you a reason why. Heritage practice has a lot of legal frameworks that binds their practice. So most of us are self-employed, and we're called by some people, or you're also artists, but we work sometimes with very strict administrative processes, procedures, legal bindings, and you name it. So there are differences in the demands of our professional practice that you don't find in other cultural professions. So that's addressed also there. And in the 11, we make some proposals to using the model lens to look for better indicators in the taxonomies, or even to improve the taxonomies to have better indicators to identify the workforce. And I'm closing. And of course, if you want, you can come to all of us and we can explain more in detail. So this is our proposal to improve the employability and the workforce conditions. And now I move to my other colleague.
To me, thank you very much. Buongiorno, guten Morgen. Being an Italian and representing a Germany-based European network, NEMO, I think we leave it to that. And we go straight to the topic of examples that complement the recommendations. So I'm just, showing some of the slides just as a reminder. You have, of course, the recommendations here in your hand. Charter has been collecting examples throughout its, the 4 years of its functioning, because of course we had many meetings, we had research, we had focus groups, we had the regions where lots of good practice examples were provided. So it's been an ongoing exercise. And of course, now we came to the point of selecting just a few to exemplify the recommendations, or just to say yes, this is possible, and yes, someone else has done it, and also we're providing for each example links so that you can actually, go back to the original source and maybe get in touch with the person. So in order to, and again, we probably for each recommendation we will just provide 2 examples, because otherwise really these recommendations, which are already very dense, will become even more crowded. So the many other examples that we have collected are for the moment in a file called Limbo. What to do with them, and maybe we can provide them on the Charter website also in the coming months, again, for inspiration to, to do something concrete and to see that something else has been done already. Not always, because some of the recommendations don't have examples or have examples, but are indeed pointing to some new direction, and it is not easy to find examples. But anyway, so for this exercise, I have regrouped the recommendations into 3 blocks: heritage, professionals, and competencies. And heritage, and of course, they are in a different order. So I'm starting from the last one, from number 12, the cross-pollination. This, for me, actually mirrors a very important document that was made public by the European Commission in 2014, a communication from the Commission to the European Parliament, etc., called Towards an Integrated Approach to Cultural Heritage, which pointed to the fact that cultural heritage is not in isolation, but is relevant for and draws from every other sector in society. So this is exactly what this recommendation says, and that there is a cross-breeding, a cross-pollination of cultural heritage and other areas of human activities. So, for example, coming, of course, mirroring this in the education, training realm, and competencies and professions. For instance, one area which is now showing a very strong cross-breeding of is culture and welfare, culture and health. The Commission has also worked, and also it's a priority in the current 2023-2026 work plan. So this is very important. And here we find examples, for instance, of master degrees delivered in Finland by the Turku University, or also a course provided by the Polytechnic in Turin, where the interesting point is that not only you have 2 different disciplines merging, but also that the course is offered to half of the participants coming from the health sector and half of the participants coming from the cultural sector. So here is really the cross-breeding and the exchange. Another quick example of a very, very innovative training course that is going to start, a European-funded project that will deliver training called the SatCult, that will bring together Earth observations coming from satellites and what they can be used for in terms of implementing, designing and implementing preventive conservation measures for cultural heritage. Again, a very, very new area, groundbreaking project that really teaches how to analyze, find data, analyze data, and use them for the preservation of cultural heritage. The loss of heritage skills. Here we have a very interesting example from a practice, let's call it, maybe more than example, from the Netherlands. It's about a register for disappearing cultural heritage professions, started in 2011. So it's been going on for quite some time. What happens is mostly referring to crafts. Basically, they receive notifications from the sector of professions that are endangered, so to say, cultural heritage professions endangered, because the education programs that train these people are disappearing. And we know if a profession disappears, that puts the cultural heritage at risk. I'm thinking of specific examples. And so they receive notifications, and in collaboration with other organizations, they develop ad hoc training, or they support training. Of course, all of this has to be resourced. So they are lucky in the Netherlands that this register is being resourced. The socio-economic indicators, the culture of data, it's already been mentioned. And so there are universities that provide courses on using methods, quantitative methods for interpreting cultural heritage. Other say, vocational education and training projects, teaching how to identify, analyze, and validate data coming from tourism, from cultural tourism, and from social media. Again, putting together, you know, the two sectors. And then establish skill strategies. And this is very important because it means that bringing together different stakeholders to actually, as one of our participants says, turn on all the actors in an ecosystem. The ecosystem is there, the different stakeholders are there, education providers, vocational education training, policymakers, and so on. It is a matter of having them click and come together and look at what skills are required, what the education and training resources are, and so on. And here we have both an example coming from a country, Scotland, one of the 4 countries of the UK, and from a region, the Basque Country, which was visited by was one of the first regional, or the very first regional workshop that that charter conducted. Moving on to professionals, and I really have to go quickly, but work-based learning, this is every professional that we encounter, especially young professionals that we encountered and interviewed for charters, said we need more opportunities during our educational path to try out firsthand what the work entails, what it is. So these work-based learning opportunities are very, very precious. And here we have a brilliant practice that's been going on for many years. In Germany, it's called Volontariat. It has nothing to do with volunteering, so the name is misleading. But what it is young professionals that want to start a career in museums. They are employed, actually, with a contract for 2 years as trainees, so to say. So it is, you know, they have, you know, the best of the 2 worlds. They work and they learn and they are coached at the same time, and this is the best, and they are paid. Remuneration is absolutely important in this case. They are, this is the best entry point for their career in a museum. Quality assurance has been mentioned, and of course it can be difficult for training, training happening not at university level. There is a quality assurance at university level in education, but more difficult to find it in other contexts. So we have this good practice of the Heritage Pro project asking a training institute associated with the university to carry out the quality assurance work. Diversity heritage workforce. Here we have a brilliant example from Finland, which the ministry started in 2011 a course called Culture for All to train new professionals coming from a background, from a non-Finnish background, so diversity, so people with a diversity, if you want to call it that way, background themselves, they are called diversity agents, and they are trained. Now there's 22 of them, and they are trained in diversity and also to act as consultants to organizations wanting to introduce a diversity approach in their functioning. And of course, there are already not very many, but diversity managers in institutions. Referring, for instance, to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, of course, you have to have a large organization probably to accommodate this profession. But very interesting, of course, this person comes from a background which is sociology, anthropology, but, so, yes, sometimes you have to be bold and engage and hire people coming from backgrounds different from the traditional disciplines that make up cultural heritage. But this person was hired and now works as staff to the director. So actually started out in the education department, but now work at, across the organization. And foster the professional recognition. I will combine this with another recommendation, which also provides some very good examples. The recognition of formal and informal training, validating prior learning. This was also mentioned as something crucial also to ensure mobility. And here we have good practice by universities who actually validate prior learning, but also, for instance, we have a very good example of one of the associate partners of Charter, which is the Tuscany region. Luckily, we have them here. They have this system by which, of course, this is a procedure that was put into place with guidelines at European level by the European Union. So we have guidelines, we have procedures, we have mechanisms, but they do it with this system called Identification and Validation Certification, IVC. So for any individual, it is possible to go and ask for a recognition of prior learning that requires making up a portfolio. And so lifelong learning, transversal interdisciplinary skills, we have many, but I don't have time. So it's just for you to go back to, or not to go back to, but to pick the recommendations in their full version, when the full version is ready. Look at the examples, the best practice, the good practice. And also I would recommend you to especially look at this, which is, this embodies the last recommendation that I considered in my blocks, the future-focused education and training. As Karin was saying, we have these 8 areas, innovative and emerging areas, and there is a lot there, also in terms of examples, of courses, of professions, of curricula. Go and look at it. It is called, and here I apologize on behalf of the whole Charter project for the very unattractive title of this publication, which is called, but nevertheless, don't be put off by the title. It's called Guidelines for Innovative Emerging VET, HELL PATS documents. Open it and look at the appendices. There's a lot of interesting material there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and this was really a very concise overview of the recommendations, which now have been published in a digital format on the Charter website, and an even more extended version will be included in the final skills strategy deliverable still under development, including the examples Margherita is talking about, which really illustrate how these policy recommendations can be turned into actions on a practical level. So I encourage everybody to get acquainted with that material. Thank you very much. Thank to all of our presenters. We now have a coffee break for half an hour, and we will come back to continue our dialogue 11:30. Thank you very much.